neurodiversity is one of those things that by design don't fit into a box.
Welcome back to the TroopHR Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Bradley. Neurodiversity is a word we hear more and more in the workplace every day. But for a lot of leaders and HR teams, there's still a big question around what it actually means and how to create workplaces where different ways of thinking can truly thrive. Because every team is made up of people who think, communicate, and process information differently. And when organizations learn how to support those differences, it can completely change the way teams work together. Joining me today is Racheal Pallares, the founder of the Neurodiversity Training Institute, who helps companies build more inclusive and neuro-friendly workplaces. We first begin by asking Racheal to start us off on the ground floor by defining what is the definition of neurodiversity.
I like to think of neurodiversity as just the concept that it's very natural for the human brain to function differently. And while the medical model might look at that as a deficit or maybe a deficiency, in the workplace, it can actually be an advantage. We don't want everyone processing and thinking exactly the same way. Very similar to when we look at biodiversity, where we want tons of flora, fauna, birds, bugs. We want all different kinds to be able to thrive. Neurodiversity is a concept that we want all different kinds of brains to thrive too, and that we intentionally create an environment where they're accepted and thought of and can create that environment where they can really come in and do amazing, incredible work.
I love that example too, because it's a natural part of the ecosystem is what we're getting at, a healthy ecosystem. And to expand on it, a lot of our listeners are HR professionals. So immediately there's this concern of what do I ask? What do I not ask? And could you help guide our HR executives through how do we bring this up in a workplace that is an inclusive conversation?
Yeah, I think one of the most important parts of this that many HR professionals sometimes overlook is that we don't want to just single out people with neurodiversities. We want to talk in general about how different brains function. A lot of times we like to put things in boxes because it makes it neat and easy for us to understand. But neurodiversity is one of those things that by design don't fit into a box. So much of what I see professionals do is they'll say, we're going to take people who are neurodiverse and put them in box A, and then people who are neurotypical in box B. And we treat box A like this and box B like this. And they soon find out that that doesn't work because you can't treat people with autism and ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, OCD, Tourette's. They all have different needs. And even if we look exclusively at autism, it shows up in so many different ways that we can't just say we're going to treat everyone like autism like A. So next they turn around and they're like, we'll give everyone their own individual boxes, and everyone with autism will have a box, and everyone with ADHD will have a box. We'll treat A like this and B like this and C like this, and it gets even more complex. But then you understand that with neurodiversity comes comorbidity, which means that most neurodiverse people have more than one diagnosis. So what box do you put them in? If they literally don't fit into a box, where do you put them? So the solution is to remove the boxes. So what that means in HR is look at individuals, right? Not individual diagnosis, but individual people, and say, here's Racheal. And Racheal thinks fast, and she's incredibly creative, and she gets distracted sometimes. And all of those things are beautiful in the right place, in the right environment. What do we need to do for Racheal to make this the best environment for her? How can we make those changes? And I think that's the most important part, is not leading with labels, but leading with curiosity and the desire to truly understand.
And what I've experienced in my own life is a point of vulnerability. I'm dyslexic, and it's been interesting. I love the term you've used, boxes, that people have placed myself in, or folks that experience that. And without getting too much into myself, what are some of the misconceptions you also see that are out there that you'd like to set the record straight?
Oh, such a good question. And first off, thank you so much for sharing. It's wonderful that you're vulnerable enough to share that with us. And I know it's not always easy to kind of talk about those things and to share that part of you I know in my own experience with ADHD, I felt like I had to hide this for absolutely so long because I was ashamed of it. And I would bury it under anything I could find to bury it under and pretend like it wasn't happening. So it does take a lot of guts to come out and say it. And I think the misconceptions, are a lot of the generalizations that I see right now. I see so many people saying things like ADHD is when you forget your keys, or dyslexia is when you flip words. I'm like, no, it's not. Oh, that's kind and that's sweet. And while that might be a tiny aspect of it, it's not. And so I think we really need to drill down into exactly what each of these medical diagnoses are and aren't, and move past some of these generalized ideas. Another one that I hear all the time is that neurodiverse people are great at patterns. And I'm like, that might be true for some, and that's exceptional, but not for all. I'm not a pattern person at all, especially when we look at patterns in the base of numbers or colors for that fact of matter. I can see patterns in people, but that's often missed. So I think the biggest misconceptions I would like to set straight are these generic, overarching, everyone grouped together type of concepts. People with neurodiversity are great at patterns. People with neurodiversities need to work in IT. Everyone with autism is great at numbers. Autism is a superpower. Like, just some of these generalization things aren't really helping us, and that we have better knowledge and better understanding to drill down. So we should.
What shows from my perspective is your passion for this topic and this subject. So I'd love to, if you're open to it, sharing a bit about what is your origin story and how did you end up where you are today advocating for this?
Honestly, I tripped and fell. It was never in the plans, but all the best changes in life happen that way. My start in neurodiversity actually came where pizza failed. And most people don't realize that pizza can fail, but it absolutely can and did fail. So I went to college for psychology, and I just love understanding how the human brain works. And I tripped and fell into recruiting shortly after. It was the only job I could find, but I actually thrived on it. I liked finding the right puzzle piece for the team. And managers would come and talk to me about what they thought they need soft skill wise. And I'm like, your team doesn't need more of that. It needs like a counterpart. And I just would be able to kind of see the pictures in a different way and really provide them what they didn't even realize they needed. And I loved it. And then later I went on and continued my education, organizational psychology, to really dive in how workplaces function, how to make them better, how to make exceptional teams. And I was consulting in a local company here in Pittsburgh. And in the mortgage industry, post-closing, there's a position that actually does an audit on mortgage files. And they go line by line, every single mortgage file, to make sure everything is done according to each county and each state, which has different regulations. And as you can imagine, it is tedious and monotonous and, quite frankly, boring, really boring work. And the team would flip over tenure every 6 months. So the whole team would leave every 6 months, and they did everything they could. And by that, I mean, they brought in pizza on Fridays and they paid a couple more dollars an hour. And then they brought me in. They're like, Racheal, we don't know what to do. So after examining the situation and the process, I realized this would be really great for certain types of brains, but not all brains. I am not one of the brains that could thrive in this. I would absolutely not make it a week. It is a little version of a nightmare for me to be in that situation. But there are people who thrive and live on this. So I went deep down into my psychology field and pulled up some information. And lo and behold, that company let me do a trial for some autistic individuals. And we spent exactly 3 extra days in training. So a lot of people worry about what this really looks like. In this particular scenario, it took 3 days. And eventually, I remember I had one of my employees there look at me and say, Racheal, please leave me alone. Stop bringing me pizza. Stop checking on me. I just want to go back to my mortgage file. I just want to go back to work. Like, please, just let me go. And I'm like, wow, what a change from turning over every 6 months to an average tenure of 3 years, from please stop bringing me pizza. It's distracting me from the job I love, to anything but this. And all because we thought of hiring differently. And that just pushed me further down the rabbit hole of what other ways can we solve real, tangible problems that we see in a corporate environment every single day by just approaching different people's brains differently. And then autism and ADHD and dyslexia, and it was this huge rabbit hole from there. And I've absolutely loved it ever since.
What an incredible story, and a great example where changing the narrative can eat the concepts, or in this case, pizza for lunch. It's incredible having the right person come in with a new idea. And When you first went to whatever leader you were working with on this idea, what's their initial hesitation or coaching that you had to do in the moment with them to work them through that change management?
You know, I am incredibly fortunate to have some companies who have enough trust in me when I look at them and I say, look, I've got this, right? I understand that I'm taking this in a little bit of different direction, but I'm not dropping you off a cliff. I'm not putting these employees in and saying, goodbye, good luck. I really hope it all works out for you, right? That's not what we're doing here. We're here to help walk you through this process and support you for months and be here during anything that might come up. And to be honest with you, I've had companies who thankfully trusted me enough to go with my vision, to know that I will support them and I will figure out what we need to figure out as we go and to really push forward to solve some of these problems. Where neurodiversity has really given a leg up is when we need employees, right? There's this whole time period where we were struggling to find employees. And then we would propose neurodiversity and managers would be like, yeah, absolutely. Whatever you can do to solve my problems. So we're fortunate to have a period of time in our recent history where that was the case. And I know now that we're kind of shifting away from it, but I hope that we can keep momentum going to where people are still open to look at this differently and to think about this differently. And as we continue to evolve in neurodiversity, talk about what accommodations look like differently and how we really make teams work together. Because when we get down into the nitty-gritty of neurodiversity, there's a lot of questions that come up, but there's also experience out there and answers for them. We just need to be able to be in positions where managers and HR is really open and listening and asking those questions and engaging rather than just saying, oh, we can't do this, because it's absolutely doable.
It's almost about creating bridges, right? And you've discussed some of this of creating the bridge for the managers and for HR. What about team members? What advice would you have for folks that may be afraid to bring something up or want with good intentions? What's the best way to start building bridges amongst team members on this?
I really want to make sure that we base everything on a concept of universal design, right? So when you come in and you start saying, I'm going to do something specifically for this person because they have autism or specifically for this person because they have ADHD, the intentions are great, but what about if we designed systems that were best for everyone? So I'm sure this is not a news story for anyone here, but I'll just breeze over it in case you're not understanding what I mean by universal design. But one of the most benchmark cases I know about is when we talk about curb cuts. So in the 70s, ADA made it mandatory to put curb cuts in, and there was this huge uproar. They're like, it's going to cost way too much money. We're wasting millions only to help people who are in wheelchairs cross the road. Why are we putting these curb cuts with those little bumps in it at every single intersection? Before that, it was just this drop off. And Harvard did a study 10 years later, and they found out that 90% of the time, curb cuts were not used by the people who were designed for. So 90% of the time, people who were able to walk off the cliff were using curb cuts, but it made it easier for people in strollers, for delivery people. I believe there's even one study I read that talked about in front of a chiropractor office, people would walk down to the curb cut because their back hurt, and it felt better for them not to have that huge ledge. So they would go out of their way to use the curb cut in circumstances that it wasn't really even designed for. Now we take them for granted and we use them every time, and we don't even think about it when we use them to cross the street. But we designed curb cuts for the few, for the people who needed that accommodation and that adjustment, and we allowed everyone to use it. It's the same concept we're approaching with neurodiversity. What systems can we change at work? How can we reduce unnecessary cognitive load? How can we help those with executive functioning struggles kind of kickstart their executive functioning without putting that on the manager, without a manager-led system into an individual-led system? But also, how can we put that in for everyone? Because maybe you have a newborn, maybe you have a newborn at home that's crying all night and you're exhausted, right? Your cognitive load is a little more during that time than the average employee. These systems will benefit everyone. And that's what team members can help to do and understand is, where is this friction? How does it come up, right? And how can we put a system in place that benefits every single person, not just maybe the one with autism or ADHD or who declares themselves neurodiverse?
I love these aha moments. And I never would have thought about the cuts in the road, and that I use them all the time with strollers. And it's just, these are the moments I live for with doing these podcasts, because you're bringing light to subjects that we may not have connected the dots before. Other few quick questions here before we come in for landing. I want to take you all the way back to Psychology 101. Okay. What was a concept that you learned in Psychology 101 that you just realized over the course of your career has really had an outsized impact on working with HR and people teams?
You're throwing me for a curveball, and I love it, just for the record. Psychology 101, I think one of the, maybe not concepts, but one of the studies that I've held very, very close to me and I've came back to over and over again is the Stanford Prison Experiment. Right? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the briefest nutshell of, without going super deep, Reader's Digest, like zoomed out version, back in the day, they would take students and they put some students as prisoners and some students as guards. And they would give them the uniform and swatty sticks and they would let them have free reign. And in the free reign, we saw people with power make some really, really cruel decisions and treat people really, really cruelly. And I keep coming back to this concept on how power changes us, because whether we realize it or not, in HR, in management, we have this power. And through the study, I learned that it's not bad people. Like the people who are put into the guard situation were drawn random. They didn't have a history of violence. They didn't have a history of being bad. Some of them had really great backgrounds and histories. And after this experience, were very traumatic by how they acted. They're like, I would have never done that. It's the situation that we put people in that dictates how they act. And by human nature, when we have more power, we can be cruel with it if we're not intentionally looking at it. So I think as we talk about management and as we talk about HR and as we talk about authority, it's something that I always come back to, that we have to consciously think about how we're yielding our power. And if we're not conscious about it and we're not intentional about it, it can go sideways very quickly. And so that's one of the things that I think marked me deeply and that I continually bring up in any of the trainings I do for Neurodiversity Training Institute, the book, all of this is just consistently a thought and a theme that comes back up.
And it's a great segue into my next question is, could you elaborate a little bit on what you all do here at the Neurodiversity Training Institute?
So the Neurodiversity Training Institute, I really founded it because I felt like so much of what we were doing was saying, hire people with autism, they're great. Hire people with ADHD, they're great. But then we are stepping back and saying, good luck. Good luck in managing them. Good luck in the day-to-day. Good luck in life. And there were so many questions about what accommodations actually are and how we can help accommodate people and good intending managers who wanted to do great things but had nowhere to go and no knowledge. And that's what I've created NTI for, Neurodiversity Training Institute. I wanted a place that could actually provide answers, scientifically backed, researched answers that really keep pushing this forward. Through them, I've done hundreds of trainings for companies, whether it's a quick lunch and learn or series. I've been fortunate enough to help companies who wanted an in-depth program and conduct a gap analysis, rewrite some of their policies and procedures, and launch full neurodiversity programs, and then spend years figuring out how to expand that throughout the entire company to make the entire process more neuro-friendly. I have a Train the Trainer program, which we do a couple times a year to help put expertise inside companies because we need this knowledge in every corner of the conversation. And there's only so much we can do as external vendors. But when we bring that knowledge in-house and we make sure that we're thinking about neurodiversity and how to be neuro-friendly in recruiting, in management, in HR, and also in product development and design and how we approach things that go to the external population, that's when we really see these changes. So that's what NTI is here to do.
And my final question is, if folks want to connect with NTI, connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I answer every single message on LinkedIn, so you can automatically go to my LinkedIn. We have a lot of different resources there. We post daily. I have different monthly calls that are free, that are just a roundtable to ask your burning questions. You go to my website, check out any of my services. You can directly schedule a call with me there and can continue to talk and go forward and see how we can make this company, this environment, and this world more neurodiverse.
Incredible. Racheal, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR Podcast. If you've liked this episode, we would encourage you to like and subscribe. If you would like to learn more about the TroopHR community, you can reach out to troophr.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.